Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 10 of Quattroporte, the review series as the name suggests, for the four-door sports and also by extension super saloons that are featured of course on GT6. And in this episode we're featuring a car which is refreshingly different really from many of the more obvious super saloon choices. And it is the 2004 Holden Commodore SS. Now this is a GM vehicle. It uses bits and bobs from here and there throughout the GM empire, including design and mechanical bits and bobs that are kind of inspired or based or reworked from Vauxhall models. Engine comes from a Corvette. It's a 5.7 litre supercharged V8, and as such, not surprisingly, has very responsive tuning potential. It puts out 768 horsepower fully tuned and 734 pound-feet of torque. So something of an Australian muscle car in effect. It's rear-wheel drive and somewhat ironically actually is lighter than its sibling, the Monaro, which is essentially a two-door version of the same car. Ironic because this is the more family-oriented of the two and yet still weighs slightly less. Now the power to weight ratio on this car is not class leading, but is very respectable at 579 horsepower per tonne, which, to put that into perspective, that's better than the real life power to weight ratio of a Veyron. Now obviously this is a tuned car on a game with unrealistic performance, but still that's pretty cool. And if you think about all the things that this car has going for it, impressive power to weight ratio, Corvette power, and understated Vauxhall inspired looks, that's pretty much the definition of a sleeper car. And this car is something of a sleeper model because you can of course remove the rear wing, and depending on what colour you choose to paint it in, it is a relatively understated car, certainly more understated than the Monaro. And like the Monaro, you see less people using this car than many other mainstream models. However, what does it have to offer against the more mainstream obvious choices like the M5, the C63, the ISF, etc.? Well, for a start, there's the price. It costs around half, if not less, money than many of its rivals at 40,000 credits, so it's fantastic value for how much power and performance you get for that price. The acceleration as well is very strong thanks to the modest weight and again huge power and huge torque. The top speed as well, although not necessarily a standout because many super saloons do have good top speeds, is certainly very good at over 250 miles per hour without NOS or slipstream. So for on-paper spec and straight-line performance, this car certainly has a lot to offer. But what about around the track? Well, it's certainly not a bad car, but the handling does need to be treated with respect. There are many cars that you can just throw around corners and have fun with. The Audi RS6, for instance, it has quite a forgiving all-wheel drive system, and although it's relatively heavy, it's an Audi, so you can just throw it around and it's a pretty forgiving car. Other cars are a little bit more sharp, more focused, like the M5 or the ISF, but again, they're pretty driver-friendly considering how much power they're putting down to the tarmac. This car though, although as I said certainly not a bad handling car, is more of a muscle car in nature, and as such, it likes to spin up its tyres a bit more. You can feel that torque. The fact that it has less weight also enhances that feeling of shredding its tyres from the torque, depending of course on what tyres you choose to use. And the handling, as I said, although certainly not bad, is a little bit more prone to understeer than some of its rivals. Now it's certainly not undrivable, and for a car of its power it does handle itself very well. But there is a heaviness to the steering which is perhaps surprising. I would have personally expected it to be the exact opposite, to have a lot of oversteer and to be constantly trying to drift. But it's not, it's just the opposite of that. It's kind of heavy, doesn't really want to turn as much as you'd think it would, but not bad. as I said, certainly a very great car to work with, both for straight line performance and for the majority of circuits. Not necessarily all circuits. I would recommend using it more on more open circuits where you can use its mid-range and top-end power more. Not really a technical kind of track car. To be honest, here on Laguna Seca is kind of borderline for this car. It's okay, not necessarily perfect, but it can do it. I'd recommend it more on, say, Motegi or Le Mans or Monza or something like that. Some track where you can really use that advantage in top-end performance and mid-range and low-end torque. Overall, though, the Commodore is, as I said at the start of the video, a refreshingly different take on the Super Saloon from its rivals. It shares some things in common, like the supercharged V8, rear-wheel drive, etc. But it still manages to produce a car from that blend which performs, handles, and feels entirely different from its European and Japanese rivals. So if you haven't tried the Commodore before and you need a high-performance Super Saloon that's pretty good all-round as a drifter, drag car and circuit racer, but for a reasonable price, the Commodore is a very good choice to go for. And as we said before, it's pretty understated as well, and people don't seem to think it's going to be as fast as it actually is. The PP finally also sits at a very reasonable 595, which is slightly lower than some other cars in the same horsepower and performance range, which again is an advantage. So, that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.